Thank you. Well, I have a follow-up. As an editor, I'm very curious to know, did you write the book in Dutch, and did you have a collaborator, or did you write it in English?
I did not write the book. I told the book. No, in English. I sat down with a young woman, and she gave me cassette records because I couldn't write the book. I did not want to write about myself. But still, there was a growing demand on, you have to tell us how you made that journey. And so at first, in 2003, I had written the first chapter all on my own, which she edited, on my life between, my grandparents, my parents, and my life in Somalia. And that's all I had. And then she continued from that. She doesn't want her name to be told because of security reasons. She said she has 4 children and she doesn't want to be involved in this. And then she would record and she would prompt me and she would say, we will not understand that. You have to elaborate on that and get me disciplined and get me telling. And then she transcribed all that, and then I would look at the transcription, and then we would just cancel out and say, this is important, this is instrumental to the story. This is a fine anecdote. It may make people laugh, but it's not necessary for the story. And so this is, in the end, what came out of it.
Ayaan, you say you are a rationalist. You believe in the power of reason, and yet you observe that your book has moved people, to some extent persuaded people, not by giving them reams of data and statistics, but by telling stories. Isn't that itself important datum? Doesn't that tell you something about human nature? That people can be moved, as you say, that people can come to an understanding of something through stories. In other words, people can learn inductively from experience rather than deductively from raw statistics. And isn't that something that the rationalist has to take into account? I mean, after all, we are living in a world where human nature is pretty important for your project.
Yes, I understand that emotions and being moved into a different set of thought, to change your mind, to sway that's very important. But what I'm objecting to is the confusion of different realms. In the realm of literature and poetry, in the realm of storytelling, novels, biographies and autobiographies, that's exactly what should happen. And the more moving it is, the more convincing it is. And that is something we should celebrate. I'm not for the cancellation or the abolition or the suppression of emotions. But in the realm of science, I wanted to become an academic at the time. I was a researcher working for a think tank. I'm again a researcher working for a think. When I was a politician, what I despised was again and again and again being appealed to by people who would say, your policy proposals, that's a matter of, the Labour Party is doing it, the Socialists are doing it, the Liberals, it's not interesting. We're interested in how we're interested in your story. It's like, move us into policy, move us into legislation. And that I thought was very dangerous, because they would point out to my opponents who would do exactly the same, who would move people into policy by saying, we are victims of imperialism. We need to stick to our culture and to our habits and to our beliefs, and you need to subsidize it as politicians and as lawmakers because your fathers and your grandfathers and so on did this and that. And then it was like you're confusing the two realms. And just like you should separate religion and the religious affairs and political affairs, I think you should also separate the emotional affairs and political affairs. And I would rather have a rational politician and a rational scientist than people who would move me and manipulate me into changing my mind.
Is this on? Where did you learn to speak English so well? No, just kidding.
Cheers.
More seriously, the left in the West, in America specifically, organized very aggressively against apartheid in South Africa. And it was powerful, it was sustained on almost every campus. It was the focus of activism. We haven't seen anything like that around gender apartheid that exists in very virulent form in Iran, parts of Pakistan, and so forth. There was some, early on, there was some busy activism, to their credit, groups like the Fund for the Feminist Majority against the Taliban. But other than that, we really haven't seen an organized movement against this injustice. Why do you think that is?
I think that it really has to do with the confusion of race and ideas, philosophy. If in South Africa the ruling regime had a philosophy that said blacks and whites need to be separated and they each need to walk different roads and blacks had to be suppressed, it just could not, it didn't seem to be a convincing idea. It was an outrage against liberalism. It was also an outrage, by the way, against social democracy. But if Islam, as it is portrayed today, as the religion of the weak, the victims of colonialism, the victims of imperialism, and so on, and they have only one thing going for them, and it's their religion, and it's in their religion that they seek comfort. Who are you, white, middle-aged man, left or right, it doesn't matter, to come around and take that last little place where people can draw themselves into? Who are you to take that away from them? And so that's why I say the debates going on, I mean, the rights, the conservatives, and so on, have always been seen as insular. They only care about themselves. They don't care about the rest of the world. It's the left who always cared about the other, whether it's the poor person or... And so it's a debate among the left, among liberals themselves, in who is it? How are we to relate to this doctrine? And it's a successful doctrine. If you look at, I mean, all Americans seem to be worried more about the growth of Islam in Europe, but apparently there are more Muslims in Latin America than in Europe. And it's a philosophy, an ideology that's growing. You can convince people, and it's an ideology that poor people are taking on, but the people who are who are propagating it and who have an agenda with this are people with a lot of money, and who do benefit from the status quo. So they will tell you, and they will tell you, whether you are liberal or conservative, stay away from Islam, stay away from the doctrine. It's something that the communists could not do, because you had, in order to to discuss and criticize communism, you couldn't avoid discussing Karl Marx. Try discussing Islam and bring the Prophet Muhammad in and see what happens.
Is this working? My name is Christopher Hitchens. I work for Vanity Fair, which is a small faith-based magazine in New York City. Believes in storytelling. My question, I think, is just permissible within the brackets of your book and also your talk, because you're very interesting about what happened in Somalia and to Somalis during your time there. And we've recently seen the vanquishment of the so-called Islamic courts movement in Somalia, but by people who you describe as the most hated among Somalis, namely the Ethiopians. So I would be terribly interested to hear, and I'm sure I'm not alone, what you hear from Somali friends and what you think yourself about whether an Ethiopian intervention is too high a price to pay for saving Somalia from the Islamic courts.
And you, being a white, middle-aged male, must already know the answer.
Lush of you. Though I feel rather rejuvenated when you've said it. Taking the veil off can inflame men. I'm just telling you that now. Someone has to tell you.
I think you already know the answer. Look, honestly, Somalia has been a construct since 1960, when the Italians, the French, and the British left. In the case of Djibouti was a French colony, the rest was Italian and British, and they left. And they left behind what they call an interim government that lasted just a few years, about 9 years before a dictatorship had overtaken it. After this dictatorship, which started in 1969 and lasted until 1990, then anarchy came on. And the only reason that